Hey, welcome to spring. It's nice and bright and white, but it'll be sunny soon. It's my pleasure to have introduce Terry McCabe. Terry and I were colleagues and friends for 12 years at the University of Colorado. Terry was professor of anthropology, director of the program on environment and society at the Institute of Behavioral Science at University of Colorado. He probably knows more about the Maasai than just about anyone in the world. How many years have you been there? 40 years or so?
I started in 1980.
Okay, so a while before many of you were born. Close. So, we don't have flowery introductions. Terry knows the rules. He gets 5 minutes. I would say I've learned from Terry a lot about how institutions and norms work on the ground and how they change over time, which is what he's written about, amongst other things, and a lot about resilience and what we mean by that. So, Terry, take it away.
Okay, I can just say a few things. And I wrote some of this in kind of a preface. I didn't go out to study institutions. What this project was, a little bit of background. I've been working in this area for a long time, and 2008, 2009 was a really bad drought. I was in the field, and I watched as seemingly hundreds of thousands of animals with people came in from the borderlands of northern Tanzania, southern Kenya, into the area that I was working in. And you gain access through family ties, but really all Maasai are supposed to allow any other Maasai to come in and use resources when those people are under stress. So the way this whole system has always worked has been for people in northern Tanzania, if things are bad, they can go up into southern Kenya. People from southern Kenya can come down into northern Tanzania. And following that drought, when people went back, the villages that I worked in started changing rules of access. They didn't do it all the same. They did it differently. Some were going to put certain areas aside. Some villages were going to charge for grazing and water. Some were going to say we're going to have dates to open things up and close things. And so this area, which is prone to drought, seemed to say everything changed with this 2008-2009 drought. So myself and colleagues wrote a proposal to NSF asking the research question, under what conditions do extreme events become transformative? And the theoretical perspective was in resilience theory. That's what we were thinking about. And then last year, when I'm really trying to look at group interviews that I did, we're starting to do the household interviews, what keeps coming up was that the rules of access have changed dramatically and that the villages are the ones that are the real governing body, shifting away from all of the traditional ethnic-based institutions. And so one of the questions is, under what conditions does an extreme event become transformative? This was one of the conditions. I mean, there are other ones too. Human population increase, livestock population increase, other things. But then when Lee contacted me about coming out here, I had said, well, this would be a good time for me to try to actually put down on paper all of the things that I've been thinking about with regard to this erosion of what I'm calling the traditional institutions to more formalized village institutions. So I'm not an expert on common properties, although I've been doing stuff on common properties since 1980. And I've been studying how people manage resources, but from a different theoretical perspective than institutional analysis and stuff. So I'll leave it at that and see what people have to say.
Okay. Floor.
Just mine's more of a clarification question, because I read the paper, but probably not close enough. But in some ways, the institutions, weren't they changing before the drought, the big drought? And it seemed like to me there was basically this combination of events going on, this changes in institutions, more authority from...
They were changing slowly over time.
You have that. You also have this growth in population that's going on generally, I think. So everything's kind of expanding, right?
Yep.
And then you sort of have the drought of the drought. So it's...
It was changing over time, but there was no... Here's another thing to remember. The changes that you're seeing over time are primarily within the village. What happened with the 2008-2009 drought was changes about access between villages and among villages. So that was not part, there was nothing that related to people who could or couldn't come in from the outside or from other villages. The changes were internal to the villages, and they were ongoing, and there was land allocation, there was the adoption of cultivation. All of these things changed things within village boundaries, but not across village boundaries.
But in some sense, those norms were changing within the villages, which then one could argue changes how they respond differently than they may have 50 years prior.
Yeah, no, that's right.
But just to clarify on that, because it seemed to me that the village structure was changing in Kenya more than it was in Tanzania.
It was changing
right?
radically in Kenya.
Yeah. Okay. So it was. That's how I understood it. And how much of that was due to encroachments on territory because of tourism and expansion of national parks?
Well, the biggest issue with tourism and the expansion of parks was that it really restricted access to what were formerly important drought reserves.
Yeah, that's what I thought, yeah.
So they didn't have, like, people couldn't go to places where they used to go, or if they did, they had to do it by trying to bribe their way in or go in at night and try to get out in the morning. But if their livestock was confiscated, it could be really very expensive to get them back. But people did it. I mean, they went into Ngorongoro. I know they went into Tarangire. These people didn't, but there's an ongoing process. There's an ongoing problem right now of people crossing into Serengeti. Some people think that the boundaries of the national parks are not really correct, and that there should be 20 kilometers or so that is really their land, not the national park's land. So, but yeah, things were changing. I mean, one of the big ones that I mentioned it in here was when they put in village executive officers into the villages. So that was the first time they had someone that was not locally elected. That was someone from the district government that was now representing the district government in the village office. And that all happened, depending on what village, early to mid-'80s.
Yeah, just.
So I wanted to follow up on Jimmy's point, because something you just said actually confused me a little bit more. So you said this is one of the conditions under which these events are transformative. Is this the change in rules, or is that the actual transformation? So what are the scope conditions on what is the outcome that has been transformed versus the sort of conditions that
The outcome is the transformation. The conditions are this slowly building up of changes over time. So things are slowly building up, they're changing on all kinds of ways, but in terms of the village becoming the governing body that is restricting access and enforcing rules. That happened after the 2008-2009 drought.
Okay, so the transformative outcome is the change in access, it's like essentially the change
Yep.
in access rules that has been sort of resulted from this change in.
That's right.
structure.
And we don't know if
Okay.
it's going to still work.
Okay, I was just.
Because, you know, in this area around Simanjaro, where I've been working, that people have said in the village government, oh yeah, no, we're not letting people in, you know, before this date, or they're gonna have to pay for this, they're gonna have to pay for that. I go up to the villages along the Kenya-Tanzania border, and they say, oh no, they can't do that. That's impossible. We're Maasai. Next drought, we're gonna go down there. And so, we'll see. I mean, there was a drought in 2016-17, but there was not enough resources in Simanjaro, so people didn't come down, so we couldn't see what happened. They actually went up into Kenya. So, because of some rainfall across the border in Kenya. But we'll see what happens.
So the actual conditions that you're arguing are the sort of buildup of changes in
Yep.
these pre-existing things that actually didn't come into implementation or effect until after the drought, really.
Yep.
Okay, so I was just clarifying.
Yeah, this is a good segue, I think. I wanted to sort of like know more about how the district authorities map onto the village, the sort of like traditional authorities, and who is really doing the enforcing, right? Because I can definitely follow the story of this massive increase in pressures yielding like an existing body making rules. Are the rules enforced? Are the rules enforced by whom? To what extent are the traditional authorities being part of the enforcement mechanism? And to what extent are the traditional authorities sort of like willing to go along with the rules as sort of like a put on paper by the council, the village council? Because it seems to me that the story here is a story that has less to do with the way in which village bodies can or cannot make rules. They probably make rules all the time that are not enforced in some ways. But it's who is doing the enforcement really, and what is the role that traditional authorities play in the enforcement mechanism.
Well, the way it works right now, the enforcement is at the village. Okay, so people who violate the rules that are now bylaws are subject to fines.
Okay.
And depending on how serious the breach is, it can go from the equivalent of, it's done in money, but it's the equivalent of what it would cost to buy a goat versus what it costs to buy a cow. So, and that's how, and even the traditional leaders like that. And the reason, part of this is, and it's in the paper, but they say, we have to have a mechanism where we can say no to friends and relatives when they want to come in. That was, in the traditional sense, they couldn't say no. It was impossible.
Right.
And so now they can say, sorry, it's a village bylaw. And so the way all that enforcement works is within the village. With regard to that, now within the village, there is also, people are responsible for allocating land and things like that, and that can get out of hand, which I mentioned at the end of this paper, which is what it did. I mean, I was there 5 weeks ago when the district and the regional authorities came into each village and fired all of the village governments for corruption. And one of them was a really egregious case. And it was one of the things that the guy that they elected as the chairperson, one of the kiddies, everyone knew he was super corrupt. I mean, I'd known it for years and years and years. Everyone had known it. And when he got elected, I went, this is a really bad idea. And then what he did, without going through any of the village mechanisms, he got together with a bunch of his friends, mostly non-Maasai, and allocated all the grazing land. It was totally illegal. And if that happened, the entire village land would have no common grazing, which would have been a total disaster. for that village, but they would have made a lot of money. But so in this case, the level above the village had to interfere to stop what was happening at that village level. So,
Just a quick follow-up. It seems to me that perhaps what is going on here, and this is just a suggestion that may be completely wrong, but it seems to me that what is going on is not so much a transition from traditional to state level or village level or formal institutions, but more of a form of capture of existing institutions and manipulation of existing institutions for a variety of aims that are not the sort of like a way in which perhaps we tend to think like there's a progress, which I think is insane, but there is a way in which we sort of like think teleologically about institutional change from traditional to state. And I think you are like, what this paper is doing really powerfully is explaining how the change occurs through various manipulations at various levels that don't necessarily require a normative or practical even buy-in of the community into the structures of enforcement and of lawmaking of the village.
yeah, that makes sense.
John?
Yeah, so something that stood out for me, I think your story is about kind of this pressure, kind of a constant pressure leading to a dramatic response. Is that there were at least 5 different responses in 5 different villages. One had the violent attack, and then the 4 study villages, one did nothing, one had
That's right.
kind of spatial, temporal, and fees. Why is that? Like, you didn't really get into it in the paper much of why do some villages, are they kind of exploring potential mechanisms, or are there differences between the villages that might account for?
There are different, it's both. There are differences between the villages. Some of the villages, I'd have to go back and look at it. Some of the villages have a certain percentage of non-Maasai. They have Warusha in the village government. Warusha they speak Ma. They're aligned to Maasai, but they're more agricultural and developed. The other thing is the influence of the people who had gone to the Tanzanite mines. And they have a lot of influence. So, and you'll have different concentrations of people who have gone to the Tanzanite mines and made a lot of money and come back. So there's those differences, but there are also differences in terms of agricultural potential, in terms of the amount of grazing and whether or not they have a border with Tarangire National Park. Those villages that have a border with Tarangire National Park have this huge area that's set aside for livestock and for wildlife. It's not good for cultivation because animals coming out of the park will eat all the crops. So there's a combination of differences, but one of the things that we've also been looking at from a ecological standpoint is response diversity to a similar challenge. And one of the things, if you're looking at some of the resilience literature, that becomes important in trying to look at whether or now other villages are going to copy. Is one of those options going to become the dominant option which everyone else is going to go for? Or are they all going to stay separate? We don't know. But they did this, each village knew that they were restricting access, except the one that said we can't do anything. So they felt like they needed to do something. So one of the other things is those villages up along the border of Tarangire, on the border of Kenya, Tanzania, they did not change the way the villages in Simanjiro did. What happened up there was that households changed. Households rapidly and radically diversified what they were doing. They shifted from livestock into smaller stock. They took resources and invested them in non-livestock assets like building a small shop or a grain mill or something like that. So you saw another set of changes happening, but it was at the household level along that Kenya-Tanzanian border, and it was at the village level down in the Simanjaro area. I think that's how that worked.
Can you quantify some of those things with your surveys and kind of?
Yes. Yeah, we're doing it now.
Okay. The next paper will have all that.
Yeah. Yes, we've had a year-long nightmare with our household surveys with the use of tablets. And it has delayed our research for a year. So I should have that now, but I don't. So we've finished all of the group interviews. We're now doing household interviews. So that is hopefully going to be done by the end of the summer. So we'll have quantitative data.
Dean?
Yeah, you have some implicit theory of institutional change here. I'm trying to figure out what it is. You've got the drought going on. You also have population pressures. You've got increases in livestock, and you've got some of these political forces around the parks and so on. Then you've just got a few observations, so it's hard to figure out what was happening. Presumably droughts happened before, I'm guessing, and so they've had chances to react to them or plan for them. So trying to figure out what are the big moving parts.
I think I might have it in here. Yeah, I mean, drought is common. That was the big question was, okay, drought's common. Why did things change so radically after this particular drought? It wasn't that this was a drought of, biblical proportions. It was a serious drought, but they've had lots of serious droughts.
It's just hard to identify whether it was the drought or whether that's just a spurious correlation of these other forces.
I think all the other forces were contributing to what eventually happened that was precipitated by that drought. If those other things weren't going on, they would have responded just like they've responded to all the other droughts.
Yeah, Jess?
So going off that,
Yeah.
I have a question about that, and then I want to pose an alternative hypothesis. So you have this, you do have a list of sort of like all of the droughts and when they occurred, and it strikes me that the land law that seems to be one of the sort of major precipitating factors that sort of formalized a lot of requirements, but maybe we didn't see the implementation or the consequence of this until after that 2008-2009 drought. There is one drought between the 1999 law and the 2008 law, right? There's one in 2003. And I'm curious, because the question is, okay, so does that mean that we care about the sort of other forces that you mentioned, the sort of out-migration, the Tanzanite mines, the, I think those are the main two that are coming to mind, right? The population changes. Did those happen primarily or pick up so much pace after 2003 that, because it sounds like you actually have a really useful comparison, right? The 2003 drought, which happened after the land law, right? But according to your theory, that does not yield the sort of transformative outcome.
Right.
So I'm curious as to what you think was different there, whether these other forces mattered less. And then my broader question about sort of potential alternative hypothesis is it possible that the drought itself was not transformative, but that the institutional changes and all these things that you discussed beforehand were in fact transformative? We only observed the transformation at the time of the drought.
That could happen. That could be the case. But, when I talk to people said, we can't let this happen again. Everyone said that. We cannot let this happen again. So it was that their resources got totally overwhelmed. And they still say, look, our grass is not recovered. So that didn't happen in the other droughts. In fact, there's the massive the difference between this drought and the other droughts was the number of animals that flowed into this area. That didn't happen in 2003.
So there just wasn't the level of pressure that required the implementation of some of these rules.
That's right.
So I mean, I think what we're getting at is that one can think of it as an event or as a tipping point, and an event causes you to go over the
That's
top.
right.
And
That's right.
I think that could be a way you want to frame this.
Oh,
Is you've
that's-
got these things, and it seems like there were two factors. It was the drought, but the actions of the Tanzanian Maasai of saying, no, you're going back. And so that was a real action. I mean, that was a real event. It could have been caused because they're saying, you know, this is biblical proportions in the sense we've never had so many cattle come over. If they come over, everybody loses all their cattle. But then the next time when they've got to go north, they're going to have to figure they're not going to be able to go north.
No,
So it you know, I think in the way we think about it, you know, you've got sort of a regression here where something's happening on the left-hand side, and there's all these things on the right-hand side that are building up. But then at time T, you've got an event, a drought. And that could have just meant that everybody suffers, and they sell their cattle, they eat them, they get rid of them. You know, it's awful, but we're Maasai, so this is what we do. We all suffer together. But that isn't what they did. So it's, and that's why I still kind of wonder how much of it, because the event, not the drought, but the actions by the Tanzanians, how much of that was due to the new power structure in Tanzania caused by the gem trade and these rich guys compared to the Maasai making the decision of saying you got to go back.
It's hard to tell, but they're very influential. The people who made money from the gem trade definitely made a lot of money.
And that was only in Tanzania, not in Kenya.
Yeah, it was only in Tanzania, and there's only a certain number of Maasai, and it was Maasai from Simajero. A couple of things. In terms of our theoretical framework, what I was saying, event ecology was one of the major things. So it was event ecology, and that was put forth by Andrew Vida, and that was part of what we were trying to look at was event ecology. But in terms of the influence of the people from the town where it's from is Mererani. So when you talk about Mererani, you're talking about the gem business. But I did a study where I looked at the political leadership at every level within all of the villages, from the sub-village all the way up to the villages, and looked at, by age set, who the elected leaders were and whether or not they had migrated out. And except for the senior age sets, all of the leaders had migrated out. And the other one was, I was told one year that it's important to have village leaders who have experience outside traditional Maasai life. So not like our grandfathers. We have to interact with all these other ethnic groups, with all these other people. Then later on, when I started poking around even more, it was, we want people who have done something different from the regular Maasai, but who have been successful at it. So it was the successful people who have been able to do that. And some of these people have made lots of money. I have a camp there, and one of my neighbors has a regular Maasai house for his mother. He has a cinder block house with solar panels on the roof, a big satellite dish, a tractor, and he drives around in a four-wheel drive black Lexus.
Yeah. So when reading your paper, I thought that this was looking at the series of events. I thought it was going to end either in an institutional change that was maybe renegotiated from both sides, kind of the North and South. But what you document is more of kind of a one-sided protectionist type of adaptation.
That's right.
And I was surprised by that because of the length of the relationship between the North and South. I guess as I said, I was just surprised by that because of the strength of that institution and those agreements. I guess I don't really have a question on that, but I
can tell you, we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what's happened right now. The people in the South are saying we're going to protect this. The people in the North are saying, well, no, they can't do that, and we haven't had a test of it yet. And when the next drought comes and the people start moving south, then we'll see whether or not they're going to enforce it, whether they're going to negotiate it. We don't know. This is also one of the things I'm saying is what we're looking at is something in progress. It's not I'm going to analyze something that's completely finished.
Right.
It's all happening right now.
I guess my question then would maybe be: has the North made any changes to their kind of?
They have not made restrictions on access to their resources. One, they are in a more arid area, so they have, but they've been, as I mentioned before, at the household level. Households have changed. They have said our cattle are too vulnerable, and what goats and sheep do better under drought conditions than cattle. And so you've seen a shift from goats and sheep. You've seen people selling livestock and getting bank accounts for the first time ever. You've seen them taking money and putting it into the building of a small shop or something to make money that's not based on livestock. So, and you've seen, because they've also been cultivating, and the cultivation has been so unpredictable that you've seen places that have been fenced off for cultivation, but they're not cultivating it. They're growing grass. So, and that's a reserve for cattle. So you're seeing very, very different responses in the two places. So
it's really interesting.
But you did say the Kenyans, earlier we were talking, retaliated by kicking the Tanzanians out of school.
Oh yeah, see, so there's been this thing that's gone on for a long time, where Kenyans come across the border, and one of the things is Kenyan cattle are obvious. They have their herds are made up of different breeds, in particular this emphasis on sow cattle, which are reddish, and they're bigger, and they give more milk. And when you see big herds of those animals coming in, this was pointed out to me during the 2008-2009 drought. People would say, oh, that one's from Kenya, that one's from Kenya, that one's from Kenya. And I'd say, how can you tell that? And he'd say, just look at the cattle. But there's been a lot of people and animals coming back and forth across the border. Over the years, there's been cases where the Tanzanian authorities will tell the Kenyans that have come across, just go back across the border. A couple of years ago, that happened not in our study area, but right up along the border of Serengeti. And they pushed the Kenyan cattle back across the border, and what the Kenyans did is a lot of the Maasai have their children in school over the border in the rock in Kenya, because the schools are better, and they kicked all the Tanzanian children out. And then everyone thought that was a bad idea, and then they stopped doing both of those things. But this incident where, in last December, where the Kenyan cattle had come down and were around the foothills of Kilimanjaro, and the Tanzanian authorities confiscated them, but instead of sending them back, sold them. And so the Kenyans had to go back without anything. And that was also a dramatic change. And I mean, you know, about 5 weeks ago, I was up along the Kenya-Tanzania border, and I was talking to people, and they say the Kenyans are having a bad time now. Their animals are dying, it's drought, but they're afraid to come across. And that's going to have dramatic changes. If you look at that whole system as a kind of sustainable or resilient socio-ecological system of Maasai that includes Kenya and Tanzania, which is the way it's been, and that Kenyan-Tanzanian border becomes a hard border, and people are not going to be able to cross, livestock aren't going to be able to cross. It'll have very large-scale implications about how those systems work, I think.
John?
Is there a way in which the Maasai might be able to adapt at that scale? Are they communicating between the north and south, or is it the case that, you know, households you can adapt on your own without a lot of people asking, and then villages is now a way to adapt at a higher scale, but things get pretty rigid from there up?
Well, there's always people talking to each other, but we haven't seen any really attempts at adaptation yet.
But do the Maasai have a system whereby the leaders of the north and the south might be able to come up with a larger framework, or is a village scale kind of?
Oh no, the traditional leaders will talk to each other under particular events. That is, the big one would be the next promotion from warriors to junior elders. I'm not sure when that's going to be, but in that case, all of the traditional leaders would be together.
But it sounds like that there's this kind of cultural idea of if you're Maasai, you have to take the other Maasai.
Absolutely.
Could that change? I mean, could the leaders,
Yes.
the elders get together and say that's no longer the case, now we're kind of shifting?
Well, this incident in Manyara, where these people got beat up, and their livestock were refused access to grazing, that really impacted people. Everyone couldn't believe it, and they said that had never happened before, and they said, and they were also, it wasn't just beating up the people in Manyara were making fun of these people. They were saying, oh, so your God has died. That is one of the things they were saying to them. And they said if those people, when those people get in trouble and they want to come up here, no way. They're not going to be allowed in here. And so that was the first thing where you're going, yeah, you're in Maasai, but we're not going to let you in. And see, another thing that's, to some extent, it's to understand a little bit of this. These are all, the Maasai are broken up into lots of sections. And in this case, they're almost all Kisango. But there's a lot of sections, different ones in Tanzania, different ones in Kenya. And in the late 1800s, they fought basically genocidal wars against each other. So even though they are all Maasai and they're all supposed to help Maasai, certain sections have oppositions with other sections. So that's an undercurrent of what's going on. Also, those people in Manyara were all Kisango. So, I mean, if they were Perko or Loido or something like that, I would have understood it better, but they were all Kisango. But I think this is changing.
Tony and Judy?
Back to that account about the confiscation of the cattle. I'm reading it more closely on the bottom of page 28, but is that an example of graduated sanctions? Because they were kind of repeat offenders, right?
Yeah.
Or is that an example of the informal institution breaking down and then needing to call in the state to...
No, it wasn't the informal institution, it was the state intervening. And under Magufuli, things have become much, much, much more rigid. And I was saying this to Lee earlier, Magufuli does not particularly like Uhuru Kenyatta in Kenya, and he is more in favor of Odinga, who is the opposition person. And so there's also a little, dig at Kenya. But no, I don't think it wasn't that the informal or the local institutions weren't able to handle it and called in the state. The state just intervened.
Federico on this, or?
No.
Oh,
Sorry,
Jimmy?
if I do earlier, but it's fine.
Yeah, so my only thought was, maybe more generally, if you think about this system that sort of grew up between the Maasai and is called a system of reciprocity,
Yeah.
there must have been benefits of it occurring early on, whenever the origins of the system are. And it seems like to some extent we're kind of focusing on it now. Is the cost of maintaining that system has, at least in the minds of many, has grown significantly. But it also you can start to think about what's changed over time in the sense of the benefits or the perceived benefits of this type of system. And so it may just be a combination of all of these things occurring over centuries and centuries that have led to this, the fabric of this reciprocal system sort of deteriorating, and along with population growth, additional pressures that are increasing these costs. But again, it really may be that, at least within subgroups, they perceive the benefits to be less than they were in the past. So if we kind of go back to the story of what would create this type of bonding, we might say, between this group, maybe it's the reasons have deteriorated over time.
It could be. I think the adoption of cultivation also has
Had some
had
of those effects. Yep.
Yeah, and because in the past, and not that far in the past, people moved around a lot. I mean, people did not have set homesteads. I mean, they moved within their sections, and the Kasango section is huge, and then in times of stress, they'd move across the sectional boundaries. When we see people starting, this was in the first time people started settling down at all, was in that 1967 Villagization Act. So that was the first time where the government built school, they built a health clinic. Some people started having little shops. And when I started doing this study, I've done a large study on the adoption of cultivation. And the Maasai have always incorporated grain into their diet, but they bought it through selling of livestock and exchanging. And when they first started seeing shopkeepers selling grain, and they saw where the grain was coming from, there were people. I can remember talking to a guy, and I said, "So why did you start, growing maize?" They said, "Oh, well, we found out it was food." And I'm saying, "Well, what do you mean?" And I said, "Oh, we used to see this plant, but we never knew what it was. And then we saw these Indian shopkeepers who were growing it, and they harvested it, and they pounded it, and then we were buying it." And they go, "Oh, that's what we're buying."
So this makes me think about last point. There's this old saying that fences make good neighbors. That they only make good neighbors if the neighbors are in agreement on what the property line is, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of that's what's going on here. Is in the story you just told, is they're starting to think about property rights.
Absolutely.
And-
This is also one of the things that's happened is that land never had a real value per se.
Right.
The livestock did, but the land really did. And now you're seeing land having value for all kinds of things. People want it for lodges. People want it for large mechanized farms. there's been, and the villages recognize this. And the villages are now also, every village has property problems with the next village. And a lot of it has to do with outside concessions coming in and wanting to do stuff. Like there was a big commercial farm in a couple of the villages, and to get access to that farm, they were paying the village a certain amount per acre to use that land. And this precipitated this giant fight between two of the villages, because they were saying, before, okay, there's the boundary. Okay. Well, now we're getting paid per acre for our village, and these other people are going, no, that's our village. And that's been the cause of all kinds of problems.
Angie?
So, I'm certainly no expert on Tanzania or Kenya, but can I push back a little bit on land didn't have value? I think land didn't have had value, it just wasn't recognized at the local level. So land had value to the crown.
Land had value, but it wasn't commoditized.
The crown probably commoditized. Again, I'm not an expert, but my guess is the British, before they granted independence to both of these states, recognized the value of the land. They capitalized on the value. And when independence was granted, individuals sought to fill that role and sought the opportunity that it created locally, which then allowed local to actually recognize the value.
I think that's true in certain areas, but probably not in the rangelands.
That would be my question.
Yeah,
is that what influenced the British?
It definitely happened in areas around Kilimanjaro, around Meru, with ethnic groups like the Chaga and the Meru immediately got access to land and got land titles.
So I guess that's my question. Again, not an expert, was literally just reading because I was curious who they based their land reform, their land titles and their land reform on. And so it quickly pops up British, which tells me that is fundamentally against the idea of community, shared resources. I mean, fill in the blank. The Brits are really good at drawing lines all over the place and drawing arms to defend those lines in the name of the crown. So that to me, if you're talking about independence in the 60s, that to me is quite possibly where the conflict originates, in the fact that you have some entities that are buying into this conceptualization of land as a property right where we draw lines, and land is a shared resource that, of course, when my cattle are suffering, I go to your water hole because that's where the water is. And those are fundamentally diametrically opposed belief systems that are actually similar to what happens in the United States with Native Americans. And we've just had a major standoff, was it Montana, South Dakota? Where the same idea was reflected. This idea of these are our lands, everyone's lands, versus there's a fence there, this is my land. And so if my cattle are sick, I should be the first to recognize the resources as my own to benefit myself. Quite frankly, to your death. But that's what property lines oftentimes mean, is that my line, my cattle recognize first. And so I wonder how much that independence forced that through, and the crown, the British crown, does what they frequently do, which is, here's a whole bunch of our laws. Good luck to you, and off we go. And we haven't really resolved the conflict over land. I mean, that's a historical British sort of approach to land reform.
The thing to pay attention to is, so you've got Kenya and Tanzania, both British colonies.
Yeah.
Almost similar resources, same kind of rangelands, same ethnic groups, following independence, total difference in the way they perceive property.
Yeah.
Kenya went one way, Tanzania went completely different. So they may have had that baseline of British influence on property, but Kenyan went towards privatization in Tanzania and capitalization, and Tanzania went towards socialism and not privatizing land. So they really went in completely different directions.
Federica?
Actually, okay. I guess to go back to the sort of like the theory of institutional change in a way that is like underlying the paper. At some point, something happened after the drought in 2008 that massively lowered the sort of like the expected benefits from future interactions among one given group of leaders and not the other, right? And one group of leaders just because one were the recipients and the other ones were the sort of like incomer. We've been talking about adaptation and institutional change, and you, the Manyara example, like figures prominently in the paper, and then you return to it. I wonder if it's sort of like if these rules are indeed neither foolish nor unenforceable, if there is a reasonable expectation that these rules will in fact be enforced in the future, and therefore like provide a fundamental sort of like obstacle to sort of like forms of social relations as they have been sort of like repeated for however many decades. Where are these communities headed? Is this adaptation, or is this like going towards genocidal violence? It's unclear to me that there is a clear sort of like explanation of why this should be conceived of as adaptation, as opposed to this is a social system falling apart, and because of a series of structural conditions and because of just ways in which elites are responding to increased pressures. It's unclear to me that this is like sort of like a benevolent adaptation as opposed to the potential for protracted conflict.
I agree with you. I don't look on it as a beneficial adaptation. What I suspect is going to happen, but I don't know if this is going to happen. I hear rumors about it that I suspect what's going to happen is that traditional leaders are going to start re-emerging as having more importance, and to say we have to have a system that allows us to cross borders, and we have to have a system where we cannot be abusive to people. They're obviously going to have something where all the resources don't get used up. But I don't see this as a long-term adaptation. If it stays this way, you will have a very different system. I mean, if you have a completely fragmented landscape in these rangelands extensive systems, you're going to have, you'll probably have systems like ranching systems in the U.S. You'll have a few wealthy people who have a lot of animals, and you've got people who are working for them. That's, yeah, I don't see it as moving in a very positive direction, and I think it will lead to conflict. So, I mean, that's the way I see that going.
Dean?
Yeah, there's not much time left, but you might say a little bit about some details. It sounds like the land, in some cases, got demarcated in some way, maybe even registered for cultivation. And I was also wondering about the wildlife, which is a big deal in this part of the world. What's going on there institutionally?
Oh, well, in this case, the Kilimanjaro Plains are is a place where the wildlife from Tarangire National Park migrate out when it rains. Tarangire is a dry season park. It's got a river running through the middle of it. Almost all of the animals, at least the wildebeest, the zebras, the predators that are following the zebras and the wildebeest, they all come out. They calve out in the Kilimanjaro Plains. So there's a huge conflict between the conservationists trying to protect the wildlife and the villagers who want to cultivate. So there's a huge problem there. And the people themselves say the wildlife are the government's cows. And they say, but the government allows their cows to come out and graze in our area, but when there's a drought, we follow them and then we get stopped right at the border of the park. But that's another big dynamic, and people don't benefit very much from the wildlife, and they've gotten rid of a lot of the predators. But there's in the park rangers can be really nasty, and so they're very intimidating. And I mean, a few years ago, I was driving down this track with a bunch of Maasai, and I saw vultures flying around. Wanted to go see what they were doing. Well, there had been an antelope that had been shot. We didn't get out of the car, came back around, got back on the track. All of a sudden, this vehicle comes back of us really fast, spins around in the road and cuts us off, which is an impressive move, I thought. But it was a pickup truck. All the people in the back have black bandanas, they have black wraparound sunglasses, and they got machine guns. And they're pointing it at all of us. And my vehicle has a big thing that says a Tafiti on the side, which is Swahili for research, and I had all these maps and stuff, and they said, okay. But the guys I was with said they would have beaten us nearly to death if you weren't there. And so there's the dynamic about wildlife conservationists. There's a whole other story about wildlife and conservationists and cultivation, where people are deliberately trying to cut off wildlife corridors. And it's not because of the wildlife, it's because of the conservationists. So that's another whole
I wanted
story
to
there.
come back to Jimmy's point about, this reciprocity thing was an insurance scheme,
Absolutely.
essentially. And so there's one alternative would be that the state takes over as insurance, that if there's drought and you lose your cattle, the state will come in because you can't do this. So one question is that happening? Another insurance mechanism is, historically, has been intermarriage. And I wondered how much of that has been interfered with, particularly across, if Maasai in Kenya married Maasai in Tanzania, if it's a woman, she moves to Tanzania, and if it's vice versa, they move where the male is. That's an insurance mechanism to some extent, because you're going to say, well, those are my father's cattle. I can't let them starve. Has that been, so is there an alternative mechanism of insurance via the state? And what's been happening, if anything, with intermarriage?
People definitely do it with intermarriage.
So that's still going on?
Oh yeah, it's very common that a third or fourth wife will be from another Maasai section. That's absolutely going on, and for the exact same reason. So that facilitates your ability to go to you with your in-laws. So that absolutely goes on. There's been trials about what's called pastoral banking up in northern Kenya, where they've tried to do that kind of stuff. The biggest problem is no one trusts the government. So, that's the government did give some relief food and things like that, and in Ngorongoro, some NGOs had done restocking, but it gets all corrupted. There's no trust. So, but one of the alternatives, what people, at least some people are doing, is selling animals and putting money in the bank,
Right.
which hadn't happened before.
Right.
That was one of the things, people in Simanjaro aren't, people around that Kenya-Tanzania border are.
But if enough people sell livestock, then it depresses the price, and particularly during drought times, that depresses the price.
Oh, well, the typical thing in drought is that the price of animals drops way down, the price of grain goes way up. And there's actually a point where you get that the skin may be more valuable than the animal. That's true. It'll get down to that low. At that point, you go, well, there's no point in selling the animal now. I can try to see if it'll stay alive. If it stays alive, then the animal recovers. If it's not, I sell the skin. The other thing that happened, and I know we're out of time, but just another thing is, people were in Simanjaro, some people bought a lot of animals for next to nothing because their animals were really weak, and they go, okay, I'll buy 5 cows, and yeah, maybe 4 of them die, but maybe one of them is alive, and after a couple of years, my 1 cow that survived is worth a lot. Right. And so there were people buying, and that's also what we're trying to get on our household survey, is to see how many people bought animals. And that was also different because some people say, look, we can't take advantage of these people. They're Maasai. They're in trouble. We shouldn't be taking advantage of them trying to buy a cow for 1/100th of what it's worth. But other ones said, well, I want it. And they bought it.
So, any closing words?
Well, thanks. You made me think about stuff, which is great. And, I was a little intimidated coming here knowing that I'm be talking to political scientists and policy experts and economists, and but it's been very nice.
They're sitting out in the hallway.
Where do you leave the room? Okay. Well, thank you.